so much for joining us. We are here live with our daily Mishlei class. We are here daily, Sunday through Thursday, from 12 o'clock to 12:20, and you are welcome to join us for our daily Mishlei class. The book of Proverbs, written by King Solomon, contains many pieces of wisdom, and this particular chapter has very famous passages that are sort of part of common folk wisdom, where they're quoted often and are sources of inspiration. So there's a saying, behind every great man stands a great woman, and that's exactly what it says here in chapter 14, verse 1. The wisdom of the wise woman is what is behind the construction and establishment of her home. But if she doesn't act in a prudent way, if she doesn't act with wisdom, then eventually that same home will collapse. If someone walks in honesty, that in and of itself is an act of fearing God. That shows that they are thinking of God and are mindful of being honest. But if someone acts in a crooked way, if someone acts in a way that is deceptive, dishonest, and treacherous, that in and of itself is an act of rebellion against God and showing disregard for God. So honesty is an act of faith, and dishonesty is an act of lack of faith. So there's a reason that a person says, we say he acted in a faithful way. There's a reason that the word faithful works both for faith in God and for faith in making sure someone is honest and doing their job. In the mouth of someone who is short-sighted and foolish, there's a root of arrogance. Arrogance leads to foolish decisions. How many cases in history do we know that history was made for the worse, and because someone acted in a foolish way, in an arrogant way? How many times do we know of leaders, of situations where disasters could have been prevented had the person not acted with arrogance? Nothing comes to mind more readily than the story of the Titanic. The Titanic sailed, and they didn't prepare enough lifeboats, and they weren't cautious enough when they came to the area with the icebergs. And the reason for that was arrogance. And so what King Solomon is saying here, the mouth of the foolish is arrogance. The root of foolishness is arrogance. It's the assumption that we know everything. It's the assumption that we just have it all figured out, when in fact we don't. It's always better to be prudent and cautious. But the mouths of the wise, they are more cautious. They take more caution. Now, this is the next saying is just such a beautiful saying. You ever see an ox eating from a trough? There's like this trough, and it's filled with hay, and the ox eats from it. So someone filled that trough, right? And yet, what if the ox wouldn't be there? Do you think there would be more food or less food? So usually we would say, well, if the ox wouldn't be there, then the ox wouldn't consume the food. There would be much more food. But what King Solomon said, no, that's not the case. The ein alafim evus ba. When there are no oxen, then the trough goes empty. And this is true also in the case of children. A lot of times people say, oh, I don't know if I can get married. I don't know if I can afford it. But in fact, it's when they have those responsibilities, often that they are most successful financially. It's sort of with the need comes the supply. It's like someone said once, no one that moves to New York knows how they're going to pay their bills. And yet, once they move to New York, things usually fall into place. So King Solomon says, when there are no oxen, the trough will be empty, not the other way around. Because when you have the responsibilities, that's when you usually get the money. And when you have the ox, that's when you'll have a lot of food. It's also, this is an idea that speaks to the power of investment, because when you have the ox, you're able to plow and you're able to make so much more. So a lot of times people are penny wise and dollar foolish. So they won't spend the money on getting whatever items they need to succeed, and then they'll remain poor. And so what he's saying here is, if you think that by not having an ox, your trough will be filled, you're wrong. It's when you have the ox, you'll have A, the responsibilities, B, the ox is going to help you with the means of production, and many, much produce will come about with the force of the ox. Mishlei is called Proverbs because it's always a hint to a deeper level of understanding. It's always a proverb for another deep level of understanding. And the rabbis say that the ox here is not just talking about an actual ox, it's also talking about Joseph, who went to Egypt. And, literally, there was much produce earned with the power of the ox, meaning Joseph. So sometimes you have one righteous, ambitious, entrepreneurial person, and that person brings about a huge amount of blessing and wealth. Next, pasuk hey, Ed emunim lo yechazev. If someone, this is just such a profoundly beautiful statement. Ed emunim lo yechazev. If someone is a faithful witness, then they will not lie. Meaning, you can't have someone who's a liar in their day-to-day life suddenly come and say, oh, you know what? Now I'm going to testify in court, and this time I am going to be an honest person. A faithful person will not lie. And yet someone who always lies can suddenly show up in court and say the truth. So King Solomon is teaching that if someone is a faithful person, thank you to everyone who's joining us now, thank you. The person who is a faithful person will be faithful in court. But if a person is not faithful in their day-to-day life, you can't assume that the second they'll walk into court and become witnesses, suddenly they're going to be trustworthy. It doesn't work that way. A truthful witness is someone who doesn't lie in general. And someone who lies in general can be assumed, you can assume that that person is going to be a false witness. Next verse is also profoundly wise and important. The person who's constantly disregarding wisdom, he's a letz, he's always making a mockery of things and not taking life seriously. When that person suddenly needs an actual reliable source, when that person actually needs a piece of wisdom, then they will not find it. You can't suddenly, sort of in line with the previous pasuk, when someone is consistently disregarding wisdom, they won't be able to just suddenly find it. However, if you're always looking for wisdom, then that's going to be easier. I think now of the people who found the coronavirus vaccine. They didn't just wake up and find the vaccine. They've been working on it for years. And so King Solomon says, a foolish person is going to look for wisdom, but they won't find it. But if someone is constantly looking for wisdom, if someone is constantly learning and seeking wisdom, then that person will more likely find the wisdom. In line with that, King Solomon then says, Lech mineged leish ksil, uval yadat. If you accompany yourself to people who disregard wisdom, then you will find a hard time finding wisdom. And this goes in line with what King Solomon taught many times. And that is that the company you're in matters. If you're constantly seeking the company of the wise, if you're constantly looking to engage with smart people, then that wisdom is going to shine on you. But if a person is constantly engaging with people who despise wisdom or just are on the other side of it, then they can't suddenly flip and see the light of wisdom. Now we come to really a profoundly important lesson, and that is the idea of macro management. Sometimes in life, we have things we want to accomplish, and we think we'll accomplish them in little sprints. We'll do this and that and accomplish quickly one thing or the other. It doesn't work that way. The way to succeed is to have your eyes on the long game. On the long game, it's something Stephen Covey speaks about a lot. It's all the sort of coaching genre. The idea is wisdom, accomplishments, those don't happen in one day, nor do they happen in one decision. They happen when we take a look at our path, at our entire direction in life, where we're going, what we're doing. Then that is when wisdom will shine on us. So the wisdom of the really bright person is understanding what path they're going on, because there are some brilliant people who look at one problem or another, but they're not looking at the grand scheme of things. They're not looking at where am I headed to, what's going on, what do I want to accomplish, and how am I going to get there? And that is really the key to success, having what King Solomon calls the havin darko, the understanding of your path. The ivelet ksilim mirma, and the foolishness of those who are not going to succeed in life is thinking that they'll sort of cheat their way through life one step at a time. Next pasuk, pasuk tet, chapter 14, pasuk tet, evilim yalitz asham. This is such an important lesson. When someone is going on that path that's haphazard, unplanned, and often negative, then they'll have to spend a lot of money on the mistakes they make. So they're going to speak out against someone, they're going to have to make up for that. They're going to say something silly, they're going to be sued, they'll have to pay for that. They're constantly playing defense. However, someone who's always nice to others, who's always looking to help others, who's always honest, then he's not spending his time and money on lawyers, on cleaning things up. That's not something that he is involved in. So evilim yalitz asham, the foolish ones are constantly busy cleaning up their mistakes. However, uvein yesharim ratzon, but among the honest ones, among the straight ones, there is goodwill. They don't need to worry about always having to sort of clean things up. Next pasuk is just heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. Lev yodea ma'at nafsho. Only you know what difficulties you're going through. Only you know what pain you are feeling. Besimchato lo yitarev zar. And when the joy comes, no stranger will be able to participate in your joy. And it's just such a beautiful lesson. The idea is that when someone is suffering, they're the only ones who know how badly they're suffering. And when someone is there with you at your time of pain, they'll be with you to celebrate when you're out of the pain. But if someone didn't really experience what you've been through, you're going to have a hard time relating to them. You see this all the time when someone becomes really sick, and then some people don't call them, don't talk to them, don't look out for them. And so then when they do better, when they have a rebound, and suddenly all the other friends show up again, they say, hello, where were you? Lev yodea ma'at nafsho. Only you know how painful things are for you. And so when you rejoice, when things get better for you, when things will improve, you'll have a hard time sharing your joy with those who behaved as strangers. You'll have a hard time sharing what you're celebrating with those who really have not been there for you. And the rabbis say that this also is talking about the time of the Mashiach, because it says that when Bnei Israel will finally be redeemed, those who oppress them will not be able to take part in the celebration. Because Bnei Israel know how much they suffered throughout the generations, the persecution, the exile, and so therefore, therefore no stranger will be able to partake in their joy. King Solomon continues, we're in chapter 14, verse 11. Beit Reshaim Yishamed, ve'oel Yesharim Yafriach. The house of the wicked will be destroyed, and the tent of the forthright will blossom and flourish. So it's just a lesson on how in the long run, the path of honesty, the path of kindness, graciousness is the one that pays off. And the next one is also just the next also just knocks the ball out of the park. Yesh derech yashar lifnei ish. Sometimes there's a path that seems very sort of, I guess, very appropriate for the person. And yet it's going to lead them to death and destruction. And so often we see that when someone says, "Oh, this is fine. It's not. Nothing bad's going to happen to me. Nothing wrong is going to happen to me," and it actually is leading to death and destruction. Yesh derech yashar lifnei ish. There's a path that is straight before a person, and its end is a path of death. And so Rashi says that is talking about someone who sins, but says that there's no problem with sinning. Even in times of laughter, you can have heartbreak. And in the end, you can have mixture of joy and sadness. And the commentaries say this is talking about someone who benefits from this world. We all ask, why is it that the righteous suffer when the wicked prosper? Why do some wicked people have such good lives? Rashi says, even in their rejoice, there's sometimes a punishment. It could be because God is paying them for all their good deeds in this world. It could be for various reasons. But don't think that just because a person has everything going for them, just because a person is celebrating and partying and wealthy and blessed with all the blessings in the world, that that's all for the good. It could be that that's actually not good for them. It could be they're just receiving their reward in this world, and it's so that they receive no reward in the world to come. Even in place of laughter and joy, the heart can be sad. And in the end, it is a sort of mixture of happiness and sadness. Next, pasuk Yudaled, midrachav yisba sug lev ume'alav ish tov. Rashi says, midrachav yisba sug lev. A person will reap what they sow. We've seen this so many times where King Solomon says two things. First of all, a person reaps what they sow. Whatever actions a person does, eventually those actions come back to them. And also, the idea is that a person reaps the fruits of what they say. So if someone's constantly speaking truth, if someone's constantly saying good things to others, that eventually is going to come back at them. If someone is constantly saying negative things, if someone's speaking falsehoods, then that too is going to come back to them, and they will be discredited and punished for what they have done. So that's what King Solomon is teaching here. And again, thank you to everyone who's joining us. Thank you. It's good to have everyone here. King Solomon says the person who is gullible is sometimes happy to believe anything. So if someone is gullible, they'll believe anything that feeds what they want to believe. And but if someone is prudent, if someone is sophisticated, then they will understand things very properly, and they'll understand things in the right way. Pasuk Tetzayin, Chacham yareh v'sar nera. If someone is wise, then they are cautious. They're not fearful, but they take precautions. So if someone's smart, then they take precautions. They sort of take things one step at a time. However, the foolish ones, they just go with confidence, no caution whatsoever. They just, take the path of whatever they want, and they do as they wish. So Chacham yareh v'sar nera. The wise person, he is sometimes afraid, he's sometimes cautious, and that way he avoids pitfalls. And the foolish is constantly just overstepping and doing things that they shouldn't do because they are not looking at things cautiously. We are here every day, Sunday through Thursday, 12 o'clock to 12:20. Thank you so much for joining us. We're in the book of Mishlei, I appreciate each and every one of you, and any comments or feedback are very, very welcome. May everyone have a good week. Shavua tov umevorach. להתראות. I hope everyone enjoys.